You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we are talking special effects legends. Here we go. All right, you ready for some FX talk?
Yeah, let's get special.
Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here with friend, fellow fan, and fellow podcaster, Pete Charbonneau. Pete, how's it going?
Bernie, so great to be back once again to talk some amazing, fantastical things in the world of fandom and podcasts and maybe some culinary delights. I don't know.
It could be.
Just you never know. It's wide open right now.
It is wide open, Wild West. I was trying to do my best Ed McMahon impression to bring you in as Johnny Carson, but as I thought about that, I don't know, as we were talking off right before we started the episode, I don't know if that reference would hit everyone. So maybe I was trying to be the Andy Richter to your Conan as I was calling you in.
Well, yes, Ed, I have with me a tiger cub from the San Diego Zoo sitting next to me on the couch. Yes.
That's some weird, wild stuff.
Wild, Ed. It is so wild.
And speaking of wild, you can find the So Bad It's podcast, where Pete is part of the hosting dynamic duo on iTunes and also on Twitter at So Bad Cast.
Yes, by all means, check us out. We're active at random times, but you can catch us probably most active on Saturday nights when Svengoolie is on. If there's a bad sci-fi horror movie that he is showcasing, we like to kind of get in and mix it up with our Svengoolie friends. It's usually a good time. Maybe some jokes tend to get a little out of hand, but it's all in good fun, and we try to have fun with it too. So
it's okay. As a Chicago native myself, I love Svengoolie, and considering some of the movies that he's shown, especially some of the ones as of late, you've got to bring a lot of bad extreme jokes to the table because they've been tough. They've been tough to sit through.
Yeah, he's hit a little bit of a lull lately. We've been trying to really get ourselves through some of these movies, and it's been tough. I don't know about you, but for us, for John and I, when we're on there kind of live tweeting it, there's definitely that interest factor of some old movie that maybe you've heard the title or maybe you've seen a clip of, and so you're kind of engaged for 10 or 15 minutes, and it's kind of fun as people banter back and forth with, like you said, like the MSTK 3K treatment. But then after that first 10 or 15 minutes, you're like, this movie is just really, really dull. And there's probably something better I should be doing with my Saturday night, and I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out right now. And you just kind of log off. But hopefully he will rebound and we'll get some, if not the Bride of Frankenstein level movies, something that at least is entertaining where you've got like a good 2 hours to kind of enjoy with your Twitter friends online.
Exactly. And speaking of friends, the John that Pete just referenced is John Zminsky, who is the other half of the So Bad It's ... podcast hosting dynamic duo. He will be joining us in the very near future for some recording hijinks.
Yes, John is being played by a cardboard cutout, so you may not hear much from him this episode, but rest assured he is in the studio. He's just a little stiff right now.
I hope he doesn't fold under pressure.
Ooh. Hopefully it doesn't get too bored or too cardboard.
So we'll go into the topic, which is special effects, and not the FX as in the 1986 movie that you and I were actually chatting about before this episode, which I rewatched a little bit, and I have to say I did not give it its due credit. It is actually not that bad of a movie. Brian Brown, awesome. Brian Dennehy, and you mentioned FX was the first R-rated movie you saw in the theater.
It wasn't the first R-rated movie, but it was the first quote-unquote serious R-rated movie that I saw in the theater. It was around the time when I was allowed to go out in high school, sometimes even during the week. It's weird the memories that you actually remember, because this was one of those, I'm pretty sure me and my friends went during the week on a school night to go see this and really enjoying it. And I think part of the enjoyment was that we were seeing something that wasn't a horror movie or action movie. I mean, there's action in this, but this is a little more of a whodunit thriller type. And I think we just, I don't know, maybe it made us feel like we were grown-ups or something. But there was something about that, seeing this movie that stuck with me, and I just have a fond memory of it. I haven't seen it in ages, so I don't know if it holds up, but I do remember at the time really enjoying it.
It's actually not that bad. I saw a good portion of the first one. I did not see the sequel, and I mean recently. And yeah, like you mentioned, it holds up as a good whodunit thriller, as a chase movie. And it's interesting because you watch the movie now, and the idea of Brian Brown, the main character, who's a special effects artist. It must have seemed groundbreaking to feature that as the main actor. You know, it's like, oh, this is what he does. He's not a lawyer. He's not an accountant. You know, he's not a public servant. He's an effects artist. So he has all these tools at his disposal, you know, tools that people are seeing, you know, kind of in movies for only a little bit at that time. But I mean, you know, that's kind of like, ooh, this is such on the fringe. This is interesting.
Yeah. And it gave you a little peek behind the curtain where I remember the one scene where he had to stage the mobster's death in the restaurant. So you had like the blood squibs that he's hooking up to him, and, you know, things, again, as a 17-year-old, without the advantage of having the internet, you would not really have known how all these movie making magic was done. So that was kind of a little peek inside, like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's how they do these things. That's a little bit meta before meta was a thing.
That's right. And the mobster played by the late Jerry Orbach.
That's right. That is right.
So the big thing in the episode today that I wanted to distinguish just off the bat, the difference between special effects and visual effects, and the difference between practical versus computer generated imagery. So the idea that visual effects are digital, they're made on a computer, and they're done in post-production, whereas special effects are typically practical, and they involve props, makeup, animatronics, pyrotechnics, and they're made on set during or even before production. So I wanted to distinguish a bit because I didn't really want to get into kind of like a best of for CGI.
I think it's great to distinguish that too, because this, now it seems like every movie that comes out that's visual effects laden is just like topping the next. That we've come to the point where you're hitting that. I can't remember the term for it, but it's that that it's becoming almost like it's hyper realistic, and when you don't have to go that far back. You talk about like Jurassic Park, which was groundbreaking at the time. The idea that you could see something representing what a dinosaur actually looked like in the early '90s, and it's like, my God, this may be as close as we'll ever get. And then you leap forward and you go to movies like Gravity, which was a hyper realistic visual effects of showing what, not the fantastical, but what life in space would actually look and feel like. Very different than what we're going to be talking about today. And I think you're great to make that distinction, because we could have a whole separate discussion on digital visual effects. But, I think what runs to our heart was growing up to those practical effects and things that grounded movies in a bit more reality than seeing the CGI on screen, which is great and takes a tremendous amount of time and effort and skill. But there's that divide there that I think it's good to stay on the one side for our discussion right now.
Exactly. So I'm going to give you what will arguably be the Mount Rushmore of special effects legends. And I say arguably because I guarantee you I will miss one. So I'm going to give you the four, and as we'll go through some of them, I guarantee you that some of the movies that they were involved in will spark a lot of memories. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So first person that came up as we were talking about prepping for the episode is Rob Bottin. And I'm going to guess it's Bottin. I guess it technically could be Bottin, Bottin.
I've heard John Carpenter call him Bottin.
Oh, then you know what? Third time's the charm. Bottin. Rob.
I was with you. I thought it was Bottin for most of my adult life until
what is Rob Bottin? And I'll just go through the names first. So Rob Bottin, Tom Savini, Stan Winston, and Rick Baker.
And I think these are, like you said, this is the Mount Rushmore of the practical effects artists, certainly that were around while we were coming of age. They were obviously influenced by some people going back to, I want to say, you have...
Well, you could go back to like 1931's Frankenstein by James Whale, and you go back to Jack Pierce's work on the Frankenstein's monster.
Right, and the Wolfman.
That far back, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we could even go further into the present with Greg Nicotero and some of the crew from KNB, and I do have them here in my notes, but a lot of those guys were also influenced by the four members of this would-be Mount Rushmore of special effects. So I figured let's start with these guys. Names will trickle in. I'm sure we'll miss a few, but I think we'll hit some of the big high marks.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Rob Bottin, The Fog, The Thing, RoboCop, Total Recall, Legend. He worked on Star Wars in the Cantina scene. He was actually the tallest player in the Cantina band.
I did not know that.
Yeah, neither did I until I saw this. But some of those movies, particularly, and I think we can both agree, a big movie for both of us here is The Thing and the work that he contributed towards John Carpenter's movie.
12 men have just discovered something. For 100,000 years, it was buried in the snow and ice. Now it has found a place to live. Inside. Where no one can see it, or hear it, or feel it.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about The Thing several times in several other episodes, and if anyone has listened to us before, they're probably
anyone listening. Anyone? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good.
John nods.
That's very nice of you to say. Thank you very much. They know that we've kind of talked about The Thing on a lot of different levels, talking about through Carpenter and what have you. But yeah, Rob Bottin, just I don't know what you can say. I mean, for all of these guys, their vision of how to take the grotesque and the slimy, the visceral, and make that a reality is, I mean, it's genius. There's really no other way to describe it. It's genius, the work that they can not just visualize in their head, but then to make those practical effects and how they go about doing that. Like, I'm sure throughout the course of making these iconic films and monsters and creatures and apparatus, there were tons of hurdles. How are we going to physically do this? How are we going to get this look? And it's that genius way of thinking of, well, let me try this substance and see if we can get the effect that we need. And it's the lighting of the shot too, to make sure that dripping ectoplasmic goo coming off of the detached head spider leg is going to look a certain way that I don't know. Clearly there are a very small handful of people on this planet that can accomplish things like that, and he is right up there as one of the greatest.
It's definitely a specialty industry, and when I think of The Thing, so it's 1982, John Carpenter released this movie, and we've talked about it, and I'm sure we'll dedicate an entire episode to it in the near future as well. But when I think of The Thing, and I didn't see it in 82, I saw it a few years later, but the defibrillator scene, and John Bottin worked with Rich Baker, also a member of this would-be Mount Rushmore. But that entire scene, the stomach, the spider legs that crawl across the floor, tons of different scenes in that movie that he helped create and bring to life. But those are just some of the scenes that those scenes will always stick to me.
And again, like just what they did to come up to make that scene so effective. I was watching a clip on YouTube a while back. I think this was after we had talked about Big Trouble in Little China and John Carpenter's films. I just kind of went down that rabbit hole as one does. And he talked about, for that scene where the Doc Copper's arms get bitten off by the chest thing, and they brought in a stunt double for the actor who was, I believe, a Vietnam War veteran that had lost his arms, both of his arms from the elbow down. And so they kind of dressed him up to look like the Doctor with, prosthetic arms that were be locked into this apparatus, which was kind of almost like a bear trap type thing, I believe, that was going to cut into, these appendages that were filled with fake blood and jelly or whatever they had to fill in, and tear it off in that one quick cut. And you watch the scene, it's a very quick cut, but it's just amazing. Again, like to just think of that, again, trying to be respectful of a person that has lost the use of both of their arms, be like, well, if we can get someone like that in for this scene, how great will it make, the overall look? And again, thinking outside the box a little bit, they went and did it. And it's just one of those things where I think a normal person, including you or I, would have probably come up with a different type of solution that maybe would not have worked as well. But there it is, and there it is on screen, and it's pretty incredible.
I would have just cowered in the corner in a fetal position and said, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know."
that we have any plaster of Paris?
Does it come in from Paris? I don't know these answers. I don't know.
I've got these pieces of styrofoam. They don't look like arms, but they're long, and maybe if we paint them, a peach color, it might work.
Do we have peaches? Is that the color? I don't know. I don't know.
I've got a box of Crayola 64s. I think we can take that one skin color crayon. We'll just draw all over it. We'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be good.
Is it the box with the sharpener? We don't have a sharpener on the set. Can we fly one in?
This budget is spiraling out of control.
All right, that's it. We're done.
Shut it down. And that's the story how the thing didn't get made.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Pete and I talked about Big Trouble in Little China, episode 19. It's awesome. If you love Big Trouble in Little China and more John Carpenter talk, you should check that one out. Rob Bottin, and you'd mentioned this when we were messaging back and forth about the episode, The Howling, which I'd completely forgotten about.
Somewhere in these woods, in this primal, sensuous, secret place, lies an experience too terrifying for words. And now, all anyone can do is watch and wait. The Howling.
And when I think of 1981, I think more about An American Werewolf in London, and we'll talk about that. But I forgot that in the same year, Wolfen and The Howling were all released. It's kind of crazy when you think wow, all these movies came up at the same time, and Rob Bottin. So originally, Rick Baker was the original special effects artist that they were going to have work on The Howling. He left to work on American Werewolf in London. But it's Rob Bottin who steps in, and a transformation scene with the character Eddie, and you have all those. His skin is moving underneath, and I guess they used air bladders underneath the latex skin to create the transformation. And I had to go back and watch it because the one thing I remember about that scene, and it was stunning, to watch, especially as a kid, but I will always remember that it was fairly long, especially compared to, and I guess you can't help to compare, compared to An American Werewolf in London, but it was just very long and also somewhat Incredible Hulk-like in the music because you had these trumpets in the background, and it just felt the scenes with the bladders, the skin moving underneath was awesome. And then of course the claws coming out, and then the mouth was kind of protruding. Just awesome stuff. 1981, Rob Bottin.
Yeah, and that movie really scared the shit out of me for a number of years growing up because again, that was right in the wheelhouse. I don't think I saw it when it first. I definitely did not see it in the theater, and I don't think I saw it until maybe a few years later on HBO or something like that. But I was 11 or 12 years old, so just nightmare material right there for me. Just all of those movies where the transformation was taking place, and I think part of it was, and I distinctly remember this in The Howling, was there was also the sound effects. So the ears protruding out of the head had this kind of craggly sound of it was stretching and straining to pop up. Same thing with the protruding jaws, and there was just something about that was just really, really creepy. And if you had any
very
kind of
visceral, very cartilage cracking,
super visceral. And if you had any type of imagination, it was just magnifying it by 20. So I had nightmares from that movie for a really long time, whereas American Werewolf in London, I didn't see until much later, and I don't know exactly why that was. It was just one of those that I just kept missing. So my recollection is of that werewolf transformation scene much more so than the American Werewolf in London transformation scene. But of course, that is kind of always the one that's kind of held up as the top of the peak of transformation scenes committed to film.
And it makes sense because, the impact of what Rick Baker did in American Werewolf in London. So he received Outstanding Achievement in Makeup category at the Academy Awards. That category was created specifically as a result of Rick Baker's work on American Werewolf in London. So that transformation sequence was just so realistic, and that combination of prosthetics, fake animatronic body parts. I don't know, I'd say it's probably, of the two compared to The Howling, and I can't remember much of Wolfen, but I would say
using just actual wolves from what I remember.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't really a werewolf movie. It's an interesting film, but it's not. It's not practical effects.
Yeah, just like the sex scene in The Howling. Some practical effects and then just some really bad animation.
I think everyone remembers that really bad animation.
Yes.
It just sticks out like a sore thumb, or like a sore protruding werewolf thumb that continues to stick out farther and farther.
Yes. Luckily, Joe Dante, who directed The Howling, went on to direct The Rocketeer and Captain America: The First Avenger. So he's done pretty well for himself. And I think Small Soldiers. Mm-hmm. So he's doing pretty good. He can afford a swimming pool in his backyard. I guarantee it. Pete and I talk about Tom Savini in just a few seconds, but in the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So let's move on to one of the other legends here, Tom Savini, and he has quite the list. Dawn of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, the 1990 version, Creepshow 1 and 2, From Dusk Till Dawn, Maniac. He's done quite a number of different films, not only as a special effects artist, but also in front of the camera. From Dusk Till Dawn, you will always remember him as the guy who had the revolver in his crotch, which I always loved that. But for me, the Dead films, the George Romero films, have a special place in my heart because I was at it. So I really wasn't allowed to watch many horror films growing up. So it wasn't until my freshman year in college that I discovered the mom and pop video store. Mm-hmm. So having not seen a lot of these movies by virtue of my parents not letting me see them in the theater, let alone rent them, I went through the entire horror section in one semester and may have missed a few classes along the way, who's to say. But that's where I got to experience movies like The Hellraisers and The Return of the Living Dead, and a lot of the Dead movies, particularly Night of the Living Dead, which made such a big impact. I mean, not only as a zombie movie, but just being a black and white movie where I started to think, okay, this is fine. Like, I can like a black and white movie. Citizen Kane, still to this day, probably one of my favorite movies, but you gotta get past that. I don't know. It almost seems like a juvenile filter where you're just like, it's black and white. It can't be good. And then with time, you realize, no, like some of those movies are terrific. And then you get exposed to Hitchcock or Truffaut and you're like, I'm good. But to see some of those Living Dead movies and to see then Dawn of the Dead and then the remake in 1990 with Tom Savini, awesome stuff. Do you have any memories of Tom Savini's work or any of those movies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Dawn of the Dead was one of those. I don't know what possessed my parents to rent this from the video store, but they did. And it was the next day, and my brother and a friend who I think we had a couple of friends stay over. We just like, hey, let's just pop this into the VCR, Dawn of the Dead. This sounds really good. And all of our jaws pretty much hit the floor. We're like, what the hell is this?
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. It became the classic horror film of its time. Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times. Dawn of the Dead. When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Dawn of the Dead.
It was incredible. Never seen anything that gory before. It immediately was like repulsed and thought it was like my favorite movie of all time in that moment. And for a short period of time, I was obsessed with Dawn of the Dead. I remember ordering the VHS tape through some catalog, and my mom was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I'm like, I need to own this. And
Was this like BMG back in the day?
This was definitely back in the day. Yeah.
Okay. But remember BMG, you could order a bunch of CDs and you could get, I don't know, you could get 5 or 10 CDs for like a penny.
Right.
And then
it wasn't Columbia House, but
Okay,
there was some catalog. I don't know where it was from, but I know that they were selling Dawn of the Dead and I was going to purchase it, and I did. Yeah, just wow. The one scene, after the zombies break into the mall again towards the end, where the one biker guy is knocked off the motorcycle, and they kind of have him on the floor of the mall, and they rip his chest open with the intestines, done again during Day of the Dead, probably a little more graphically, but just, I mean, it's fake, but there's something about it that just looks so real, and that's all down to Tom Savini, who I believe was a medic in Vietnam, which is, I think, where he kind of got his ideas of anatomy, and he had seen some serious shit during his time during the Vietnam War. So here's a guy that was able to apply that and use that for something in a creative way that I think is pretty incredible. And I think among all the people that we're going to talk about, he seems to be the one that has been, as you said, like he's been in front of the camera in a bunch of things now. And I think he's kind of really embraced the role where a lot of these other guys like Rob Bottin and Rick Baker, they tend to do their movies and then they're back kind of behind the scenes again, whatever they're working on next. Tom Savini is a little more out there. He does a lot more of the, the cons where you can kind of interact with him. He just seems to be much more engaging, and maybe that's just his personality.
And he was one of the motorcycle raiders in Dawn of the Dead. And then he created Bub, the zombie from Day of the Dead, let alone that scene that you mentioned where they rip the one obnoxious general in half.
Captain Rhodes.
Captain Rhodes. I gotta say, Captain Rhodes deserved it.
He did.
He did.
But what a scene chewer in that movie. He makes that movie.
Very nice.
And there was no pun intended about scene chewing. But I guess you could probably, now that I've said it.
And Savini does have his special effects school as well.
And plus he did the makeup for Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is probably like my last of like my favorite Friday the 13th movies before Jason became like this undead, unstoppable force of nature. He was still technically just a masked killer, more or less human at that point. So I really, dig those first 4 Friday the 13th movies. And he was brought in for the, what was at the time was supposed to be the final chapter. But, money has a way of changing these things. But, did a tremendous job with coming up with that idea of the machete in the head and having that prosthetic upper torso kind of slink to the floor. And I think from what I remember, what you see on screen was not exactly how it was supposed to go, because the kind of the rubber prosthetic of what Jason's head is supposed to be got caught. So you kind of see it lift up a little bit, and there's something kind of gnarly about it. And they must have thought the same when they were looking back at the footage, because they kept it in there. But I do believe that it was supposed to go a little bit smoother than that. But it's just one of those like quirks of the filmmaking process and working with practical effects. Not everything is always going to go according to plan when you start filming, but it still looked cool enough that they're like, yeah, keep it in there. That's great.
Happy accidents, right?
Happy accidents. Bob Ross, R.I.P.
There you go.
Looking down, smiling.
Someone else who's looking down, smiling is Stan Winston, who passed away not too long ago.
See what you did there.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
You're welcome. And he contributed to the Terminator series, the first 3 Jurassic Park films, Aliens, Monster Squad, the first 2 Predator films, Iron Man, Edward Scissorhands, and I had to add it in there just because I know you will appreciate this, Manimal, the TV series.
Jonathan Chase, master of the secrets that divide man from animal. Animal from man. Manimal.
Yeah, who can forget Manimal? Who can remember Manimal?
Not many people. No,
yes, that's correct answer. Not many people remember Manimal.
No. But to think of Stan Winston and the impact that he's made, if you're going all the way back to Terminator and, going from, James Cameron is working on Piranha 2 over in Italy. But while he's doing that film for Roger Corman, New World Pictures, he has this dream about a robotic endoskeleton coming out of the smoke, and just decides to go ahead and kind of play from that idea. And then the Terminator script is born, and after working with his wife at the time, Gail Ann Hurd, and then next thing you know, Stan Winston comes in and brings that dream or nightmare to life and makes an incredible impact, because some of the scenes in Terminator, especially towards the finale, when you see the endoskeleton walking, I mean, it has a weight, it has texture to it. The way you'd mentioned earlier about how light plays such an important element in kind of making this practical special effects, work, especially when you're doing it on the set. The Terminator just looked like a real robot, encompassing real space with Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn. And then some of the great scenes with Arnold Schwarzenegger as a Terminator, taking out the eye, cutting his forearm, where you can see the hydraulics and the mechanisms working underneath, and just some awesome work by Stan Winston that will be remembered forever.
Oh, absolutely. And again, taking a bit of a different tack from some of the other artists that we've talked about that went more for the gore route and kind of how you can manipulate the human body to achieve that kind of cringeworthy effect, because it's all, we all have a certain sensitivity to our bodies because it is such a fragile thing, and how easy it is to have a masked killer just snap your arm in half or something like that. So to see that kind of gore on display, there's that natural just revulsion to it, because you kind of, in a way, almost picture that happening to you, and it seems so disgusting. Whereas
David Cronenberg has made an entire career.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we can talk about The Fly a little bit too, which was just a complete grotesquerie, but fascinating in its own right. But Stan Winston went kind of more of the technical, the machine side of things, and showcasing how special effects special practical effects. I know there was some green screen involved, and probably, I think from what I recall, some miniature model work, but there was also a lot of to scale versions of the Terminator once the skin gets burned off, and the sci-fi element of it there that was just bringing, again, something that we hadn't really seen before, and certainly hadn't seen done like that before. It's films kind of coming into their own, and the creative types just bringing and enhancing filmmakers' ideas to produce something that's a bit more memorable than, I always go back to when I saw Star Wars for the first time, and just how incredible the effects, John Dykstra, ILM, the work that they did, coming off of something like 2001, where I think a lot of the special effects artists then went to work for ILM and Lucasfilm. But then you had all those Star Wars knockoffs that came out in the 70s and 80s, and the special effects were just so horrendous. And, not even talking about like Laser Bolt, it was the ships and how the ships moved. It was almost like barely a step above the 50s, where the rocket ship is on a very visible monofilament wire, and there's just a flame coming out of it, and there's smoke, and none of this is realistic at all. You've got these artists that are coming into their own in the 70s and the early 80s that are really just taking this type of film to a new level. And I really think these guys really pushed the envelope, not just for horror and sci-fi, although that was where they did the majority of their work. I think they ended up basically taking the entire industry along with them, because here's this kind of niche area. Like, horror films were always kind of derided in the 80s as just schlock and for teenagers, and there's nothing of value. But I think certainly as we've grown older, and I think as generations have gone on, you can see that was an art to this when it was done right by these people with talent. Stan Winston being one of the major examples of that.
Absolutely. And when you think of, his work on Monster Squad and kind of taking these archetypal visions of the universal monsters, but then how he was able to evolve from Terminator 1, where, like you mentioned, you have miniatures and you have forced perspective, and then you're moving into Terminator 2, where you're bringing in special effects after James Cameron was able to kind of do a proof on The Abyss and make sure that liquid metal effect worked.
Yeah.
And then integrating, special effects with practical effects in Jurassic Park, where you've got Spielberg taking 2 teams to work on dinosaur designs, one using old-fashioned stop-motion effects that Ray Harryhausen made legendary on, Jason and the Argonauts, Mysterious Island. And then Spielberg has this other team working on digital effects. And the head of the stop-motion team, I was reading these notes from a New Yorker article, and the guy says he saw the stop-motion effects lead, saw the work the digital team was doing, and in a deadpan way, when he saw the T-Rex scene, said, I think I'm extinct, which then was brought into the movie. But you've got guys like Stan Winston who were able to, kind of roll into the evolution of visual effects and practical effects and say, okay, I know what I do well, and I can see what visual effects is bringing, what CGI is bringing. And in Iron Man, a very recent example, it could so easily come off as just a guy walking around in a bunch of cardboard pieces, shiny cardboard pieces, right? But to be able to have those scenes where there's a sense of weight to see Robert Downey Jr.'s mask kind of pop up, and he's in the suit, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. And yes, it's obviously aided by CGI to fly, to shoot the repulsor rays, but in just those basic scenes where he's just wearing a glove or the helmet or the entire suit, you have someone like Stan Winston who is able to say, if we can make this real, then people, to use a terrible example from like Superman, though you'll believe that he can fly. It's like, if we make him look good in the suit and the suit works, people will believe that the suit will fly, that it can do all of these heroic things that seem to be beyond our technical limits now. But you're like, no, I got it. And then you can do something as comical, dark humor as, Edward Scissorhands, or even something as, I don't want to say simple as Predator, but something that just seems so seamless. It's like, all right, you've got these guys, it's an action movie, I get it, but to just seamlessly add these sci-fi elements on top of it, Easy takes a lot of hard work, and he did it really well and consistently, which is saying something.
Sure, and I think it takes a certain amount of confidence in one's ability to kind of go that hybrid route. You've got a certain type of effect that you're really good at, and whether it's working with prosthetics or coming up with molds and things like that. But to be able to see, like, okay, here's the future, it's coming. Maybe like something like Last Starfighter was a little crude with its, digital effects. But you're right. Once you got into the Abyss, when you saw that liquid digital, like the water, and then to move that onto T2, that's when people were starting to open their eyes and be like, wow, this is what can be accomplished. And for someone to be at the top of their field and to not only just recognize that, but also recognize, like, I need to kind of straddle the line here, and I need to delve into that world. I don't need to become maybe the best visual effects artist on the planet, because that's probably a younger person's game, but I can take my skill set and what I'm really good at and what I have been awarded and lauded for, and kind of seamlessly transition into that hybrid where there's some practical effects, there's some digital effects, and you kind of create that seamless world. Again, I think people are certainly willing and want to suspend their disbelief as much as possible, and you just can't give them reasons to laugh at something or to take them out of it. And it's so easily done if you don't have the budget or you don't have the skill. And I think he was certainly one of those people that saw the future and was able to adapt to it.
Absolutely. And then, like you said, when you're taken out of it, there's that belief that everything can be created or fixed in post, and you have bad examples. And I mean, there's a lot of them. So this is a small number that I could think of, but movies like The Phantom Menace or I Am Legend, Van Helsing, The Mummy, the Lycans in Underworld, speaking of werewolf movies, another bad one, American Werewolf in Paris, that relied on CGI werewolf transformations, unlike an American Werewolf in London. I mean, those are examples of just times where the effects is so bad, and regardless of time, it's like an visual effects made in 96 is obviously different from 2006 or 2016, but some of these practical effects that we've talked about, like Terminator and The Thing, have lived on regardless of the release of the movie. And then you have examples of good integration of practical and visual effects. Guillermo del Toro does this really well in his movies, Hellboy 1 and 2, and especially Pan's Labyrinth. But even something recent like The Force Awakens, where J.J. Abrams was very specific about trying to use practical effects when possible and trying to harken back to what the original trilogy, brought to the screen, and using puppet work that Henson had created. It's like, okay, well, there are great examples out there, just like there are really, really bad ones. But when it works really well, it's just, it becomes timeless. It becomes classic.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think sometimes filmmakers and effects teams run into the problem where you can create something that's so shiny and looks so great in CGI that even in that way, it kind of takes you out of it a little bit, because now you're staring at the screen and like, oh, that's so beautiful. And you're kind of looking at how the digital effects are rendered. And again, you're not paying attention to the story. You're not paying attention to what's happening in the scene because you're admiring the fine detail of blades of grass, or, I'm thinking a little bit of Avatar, which I know at the time everyone loved it. I never really got into it. I mean, a beautiful looking film, but again, because there's so much CGI in it, it's almost like an animated movie to me. In many ways, it actually is. But I think sometimes you run the risk of you're pushing the envelope so much and it's so far out there. And yes, the effects are incredible and the work looks amazing, just from the actual effect to the artistic vision, that even sometimes that pulls people out of the reality, or at least pulls them out of what they should be concentrating on, and that is focusing on the story and what's going on the screen.
Pete and I conclude our conversation by talking about special effects legend Rick Baker in just a few seconds. In the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan to Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Who's one of the fourth of the special effects horsemen that made people focus on the story?
I have a feeling you're going to tell us.
It's Rich Baker. Who was responsible for the American Werewolf in London? Did you like that transition?
That was, this is all about transitions, and you are a master, Bernie, of transitioning.
I do have my my correspondence school master's degree in transitions. Yeah. So Rich Baker, American Werewolf in London, Men in Black, Exorcist, Star Wars, Grinch. He worked on Videodrome. Speaking of David Cronenberg earlier, Coming to America, Ed Wood, The Nutty Professor, and of course the werewolf creature that Michael Jackson turns into in Thriller.
Yeah, I mean, where do you begin? The Exorcist is still a movie that scares. Well, it still disturbs me. I grew up a good Catholic boy, so that was a movie that I could not watch after dark for the longest time. And some just amazing, practical effects there, and not even just the head turning around. It was the levitation off the bed. It was the pea soup. It was, again, a grotesquerie of something that was grounded in some sort of reality, even though it was a fantastical event that was going on in that film. And, certainly not as over the top maybe as some of these other films, because they're just so far out there where you're introducing creature effects. But, I'm recalling like when they're splashing the holy water on Reagan's arms and you see the lacerations opening up on her arms. This just effects like that maybe in the grand scheme of things seem a little bit underwhelming, but they serve the purpose of the film so well, and they're understated and yet still very visceral. I mean, I think there's a certain talent involved in that as well.
CGI is an amazing tool, and it's only as good as the artist behind it. I think if you have a very talented director and give him good tools to use, he'll make a good movie. If you have a crappy director and give him good tools, he'll still make a crappy movie. Guess who said that?
John Carpenter?
No, Rick Baker.
Rick Baker.
Yeah, that's just, some of the work that he did, like you mentioned, The Exorcist, amazing. But he holds a special place in my heart because as I knew a little bit about this, but then researching about him as a teen, he began creating artificial body parts in his kitchen, and he appeared briefly in a fan production called The Night Turkey. And The Night Turkey was a 1-hour black and white video parody of the Night Stalker, as in Kolchak the Night Stalker.
It all comes back to Kolchak.
That's right. Or The Thing.
Or The Thing. It's either one.
Yeah. It's always one of the two. But no, I mean, I knew that about Rick Baker, so I always thought, all right, this is a man after my own heart. But I think there was something that he knew, and I think that goes for all of these guys, a secret formula on how to, just do really good makeup. And just when you have, and that was a quote that I read of his, something like, when you have a really good actor and he's in great makeup, like it trying to transcends, like, you're giving him a tool that they can work with, and you're not impeding them or making them feel awkward or stunted in their performance. In all of those movies, like Coming to America, where he has Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall in different prosthetics, but playing different characters. Yep. It's just, just an amazing example, let alone what he did in Nutty Professor and Videodrome, some of those scenes that were very, they're David Cronenberg at his finest, very visceral, very gory, but like you said, it kind of alludes to his, fascination with the body, and definitely in that movie with media and how it can affect people and sexuality, and just knowing that Rick Baker was a part of that. It makes sense, because some of those movies, maybe not necessarily some of my favorites, like The Grinch, it's whatever.
Sure.
Men in Black 1, it is fine, but his contributions to it, and of course with American Werewolf in London, it's just like, again, just a seminal work and movies that live on. And when you think about some of those movies, it's hard not to think of The Exorcist and think about that entire scene, the exorcism scene, like you said, with the lacerations, the pea soup, the levitation, all of these different things that come together, but don't take you out of it and make you think, oh, there's the monofilament wire, there's, this. It's like, no, it's just good effects on screen done well.
And I'll even give him credit, and I'm just looking this up now, but he was actually the actor who portrayed King Kong in the 1976 remake, which gets a lot of grief and derision, most of it rightly so, but there's still something about that movie that I just really enjoy. It's cheesy, and it's a bit silly, but there's something about that movie I still really kind of like. But I never knew that he actually, in addition to being the makeup artist for that, was actually King Kong. And I think he did for 1976, I think he did a pretty outstanding job of portraying, for a guy in an ape suit, something that looked conceivably like an actual gorilla. So I have even more respect for him now that I know that he starred as King Kong.
And is that the movie that you said your grandfather would tell you when you would go throughout New York and you would see cracks in the sidewalk, that was King Kong walking through the streets?
Yeah, no, that's a great memory. Yeah. That was the one where he climbed the World Trade Center at the end and gets shot down off of that. Yeah, but when I see a crack in the pavement, when I used to visit Manhattan growing up, my grandfather would say, like, oh, this must be where King Kong fell. Actually, no, I said that. I said, this must be where King Kong fell off the Twin Towers. And my grandfather, being the enabler, was like, you're probably right, Peter. Let's keep moving.
So some of the students of these four horsemen of the special effects apocalypse, we have to mention K&B, Greg Nicotero, Robert Kurtzman, Howard Berger. These guys worked early on under some of the men that we mentioned. So Greg Nicotero began his career working and learning the trade of special effects under Tom Savini, who had been working with George Romero. And he worked on Day of the Dead, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, Give Me Some Sugar Baby, Halloween 5, Spawn, I got to throw in there Bubba Hotep, and of course Boogie Nights for the one amazing scene that I'm sure he probably worked on.
Mm-hmm. But Bubba Hotep, wow, another fantastic little film.
That's right. And Howard Berger, so he, I was reading some of the interviews, and he kind of went back to that comment about Jurassic Park where he's like, we're all extinct, but realized that after seeing Jurassic Park, that there were kind of three ways to deal with the potential new threat of CGI. And the first one was to get out of doing special effects and join the digital revolution, which a few special effects shops actually did, and they're unfortunately now extinct. Or two, fight the digital revolution and convince the special effects industry that anything visual effects can do can be done practically. Or three, find a way to integrate what practical special effects artists do best and work with visual effects artists and bring a new kind of magic trick to filmmakers and audiences. Kind of goes back to, some of the evolutionary thinking that I'm sure all of these guys did, but you see it, especially with Stan Winston, like we were talking about. But KNB's just done a lot of different work. And right now, I know Craig Nicotero is working on the Walking Dead series, on Fear of the Walking Dead. I mean, they've just done a lot of work, and you see them in movies, in TV, but they are kind of like, some of the spawn of the Rob Bottin's, the Savinis, the Winstons, and the Bakers.
And I think it speaks to exactly what you just said, too. You're seeing that integration on a show like The Walking Dead, where you've got a healthy dose of practical effects, and there's CGI in there to kind of enhance what they need to. You can't rig up every zombie's head to explode from a gunshot, because that takes time and it's expensive. And I think that's always been kind of the argument against practical effects, is that, the digital is just so much cheaper to produce now. And, you go that route if you can, but you do that at your own peril. And if you want to do it right, and if you really have care for and with the product that you're trying to put out there to the public, I think that kind of hybrid mix between the practical and the digital is we're seeing some great fruits of that, and The Walking Dead probably being one of the more prominent examples right now that I can think of.
Yeah, and you think studios like the Weta Workshop and the work they did on, TV series like Hercules and Xena, but then the work on the Lord of the Rings movies where they put together practical and visual effects. They're working on Dawn, and they worked on Dawn and Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and those two movies are amazing in the way they have visual effects, but some of the practical effects in there are seamless to the point where it just goes back to, the choice that K&B and a lot of those special effects artists made, where they realize, we can either go quietly into the good night and disappear and just be happy that we have this work out there, or we can evolve, we can change, and we can contribute and keep being artists, keep, making movie magic.
And I think it goes back to the start of our conversation too. It's, you've got these creative people, so they're not going to go quietly into that good night if they have ideas and ways that, and people that they still like working with. It's how do you get past the roadblocks that come up? We were talking earlier about, what might have come up during the filming of The Thing. It's all right, so we've got some things that we need to figure out here. How do we marry the two? How do we marry digital and practical? And they're going to do it because there's a creative fire that burns within these guys, and it's about producing something that's going to be memorable. I haven't read enough or watched enough video of some of these artists to know exactly what goes through their head, but I'm just thinking in terms of the creative type that has something to say or wants to gross someone out in a brand new way or wants to take something to another level. These guys have all achieved so much. I have to feel that they're driven by something along those lines, and why stop just because their expertise might be in one area that may or may not be getting phased out. I think there's always probably going to be room for some practical effects. Can it be done on a certain budget? Can it be done a certain way that lends some of that tangible feel to a TV show or a movie while being supplemented by the digital effects that just can't really be done cheaply or quickly or properly from a practical standpoint? And this is the creative process. This is how you go about telling your story the best way you can. And it's not always just one person. There's a whole group of people involved. There's all these visions, and it's how do you work within those constructs and make something, memorable that these guys have already done.
Yeah, to appropriate a Goldblum line from Jurassic Park, art finds a way, right?
Yes.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
Are they slow-moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.